Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sueños to Success with Dr. Victor Rios. The theme of today's episode is the transformative power of storytelling. I want to start by asking you a simple question. What comes to mind when you hear the words storytelling? Maybe a good laugh, maybe inspiration, maybe wisdom. For me, storytelling isn't just about sharing tales, it's about transformation. It's about making change in yourself and in the world. Steve Jobs once said, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. Today, we're diving into how storytelling can reshape lives, especially for young people and folks out there that have encountered trauma in their lives. Let's talk about a paradigm shift that storytelling can create. I use a framework called victim, survivor, thriver. The story of a victim, of course, is the story of someone that's been impacted by the world, someone that feels like the world has done them wrong, that their life has been a life of struggle and they cannot get through. The story of a survivor is someone that's overcome some trauma, some adversity, and is now in a new place where they can try to dream and reshape their life. And then finally, the story of a thriver is when someone says to themselves and to the world, hey, I've been victimized in the past, but I'm not a victim. I've survived, but I'm not just a survivor. I also thrive because I'm moving forward towards my future and I have a plan in place. And day to day, I take steps to heal myself and help this world become a better place. So when we help young people shift their narratives through this lens, we see resilience, hope, and transformation emerge. So storytelling isn't just anecdotal, there's real science behind it. I'll talk about a study in research cognitive processing therapy. This is a therapeutic approach initially developed by the VA, by Veterans Affairs, for veterans coping with PTSD. And this study found that 40% success rate in significantly reducing PTSD symptoms by the end of treatment. So, beyond alleviating PTSD, CPT has been shown to foster substantial improvements in related areas, including reduction in depression, anxiety, feelings of guilt, and difficulty in social interactions. These outcomes highlight the holistic benefits of this evidence based framework, proving that rewriting one's narrative can lead to both psychological healing and personal growth. Now, this approach has been used with veterans of war who have PTSD. But as many of you know, a lot of young people that grow up in adverse environments end up experiencing similar symptoms to PTSD. So, our thinking is what if we were to use this approach to young people with young people who have those kinds of experiences of trauma and now they're kind of trying to get through and heal through that trauma. So I've adapted this approach to help students craft their own empowering stories and develop practical tools like community circles, vision boards, and what I call the anger box versus the healing circle. In the anger box, you have all the reactions to the world that are negative, like anger, depression, lashing out, self harm, harming others. And in the healing circle, you have the positive healing strategies that people use to overcome adversity. These may be well being practices, exercising, meditating, uh, building healthy relationships with others. You get the point. So, these tools help students move from feeling like a victim to surviving, and the end goal to a life of fulfillment and thriving. Research supports that sharing personal stories can reduce feelings of shame and isolation. There was a 2021 Harvard Health study that reflected on sharing our personal narratives and how that reflection fosters connection and diminishes isolation, contributed contributing to healing. Additionally, narrative therapy has been shown to enhance hopefulness and self efficacy among young people. A 2016 study published in Medical News Today found that children who participate in narrative therapy exhibited improvements in self management, self awareness, empathy, and decision making skills compared to those who did not. Self awareness, empathy, and decision making skills compared to those who did not. These findings suggest that when individuals, particularly young people, reframe their personal narratives, they develop a stronger belief in their potential, fostering a sense of limitlessness. The idea that you got no limits. Regardless of your adversity, you can go wherever you want to go. As I like to say, hurt people, and healed people heal people. Storytelling fosters collective healing, turning pain into purpose. Now, I know some of you know that in some cultures, maybe your own culture, storytelling is more than just entertainment. It's a source of knowledge, healing, and impact. The Native American novelist Leslie Mormon Silko said it best: a word of caution, our stories are not just for entertainment. In many indigenous cultures, storytelling is a cornerstone of community life, serving as a way to pass down wisdom, traditions, knowledge, and healing practices. For example, in Native American traditions, storytelling is used to teach important life lessons, instill values, and foster a sense of identity and connection. These stories often blend spiritual insight with practical guidance, teaching younger generations about resilience, respect, and their connection to the natural world. Our stories are medicine. They heal the spirit and guide the heart. I've seen this firsthand through storytelling. Young people can spotlight systemic injustices while also planting the seeds for solutions. This duality is what makes storytelling so powerful. Mentorship and community based storytelling frameworks help students flip the script. Educators, parents, and care workers can integrate structured exercises to guide youth in reframing their identities and finding their voices. Storytelling isn't just about changing lives, it's about changing the world. The question isn't whether their stories will create change, it's how soon. I've invited a very special guest today, a professional storyteller. She's a former public school teacher and school district leader who helps adults learn how to bring out the stories in young people. Her name is Audrey Lee. Audrey Lee started writing fiction at the young age of 11 when she and her best friend co authored a masterpiece about gallivanting around London with the members of Duran Duran. Unfortunately, these spiral notebooks have yet to find a publisher, and no one's really come to understand the genius buried within them. As a result, The Mechanics of Memory is her first work of published fiction, published just a few months ago in 2024. Before she started writing fiction, Audrey received her master's degree in education from UC Berkeley. Hey, go Bears.
Go Bears.
And spent over 2 decades in public education. When she isn't writing books, she consults with school districts, supporting them to create environments for students that lead to more equitable, culturally responsive, and socially just practices. Audrey lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband, son, and Maltipoo, the little dog named Luna. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So good to have you here. So you're a writer. You got. I want to in a little bit talk about even that process of getting an agent. Tell me a little bit about that journey. What it's like to write a book, a fiction, but what got you interested in writing a fiction in the first place?
I think that as a child, I always loved reading. I was a huge reader. I devoured books. I always got in trouble nightly because I was eating dinner and I had a book propped up next to my plate. I loved books because of the escapism in them,
Mm,
because I could go to another world, I could live another life. And I think hand in hand with that, I always enjoyed writing. And I wrote off and on probably since I could start writing. I was, I wrote little stories when I was a child and illustrated them. Um, but I think throughout the course of my life, I used writing as a form of therapy. So I wrote a lot during high school. I wrote a lot during the teenage years. I wrote when I was sad. I wrote when I was angry. This time around, that wasn't the situation. But I think something in the back of my mind, and having been in education my entire career, I always thought I wanted to write a book. And so when I sat down to actually do it, the only thing I was thinking of was, I wonder if I can write a book.
mm,
And I did, and it took a really, really long time. And when I thought I was finished, I was not anywhere close to finished. But it was a journey for me because I had enjoyed reading books of others for my entire life, and then coming at it from the writer point of view. It's one thing to read stories, and all of us, I'm sure, have read books where we didn't like them, we didn't care for them, should have been more this way, I didn't like the ending. But when you're on the writer side of it, trying to craft a story and bring someone along in a tale from beginning to end and not have them close your book in the middle, it's a whole different kind of craft to be able to construct that story and have it hold together through. So I had to read a lot of books on the art of storytelling, on
mm,
how to craft a narrative, on the hero's journey, all of those things you take for granted when you read because the author has already thought of those things for
mm,
you. But as a writer, um, you need to attend to sort of the way our brains are wired to respond to story.
mm. And just so the audience knows, your book is The Mechanics of Memory. It was recently published a few months ago in 2024. It's got good reviews out there. And of course, it's a great book. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about its content. But for now, I want to just talk about the backdrop because I know we got a lot of audience members out there that ask me, hey, Dr. Rios, how do I publish my own book? So tell me a little bit about like I know that you didn't have, let's say, an automatic agent or an automatic representation to sell your novel. So how did you go about even finding someone to have interest in your story?
So that has been it. I would not give it back for the world. It has been the most interesting journey and a very steep learning curve. Um, when I finished the book, it took me about a year to write it. And as I mentioned, I thought I was finished, but I wasn't. But I finished it and I thought, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Now I have this finished book. What do I do? So I Googled what I'm supposed to do. And I found out I should get an agent. And so, unfortunately, you don't just call literary agencies and say, "I'm ready for you now. Please publish my book." And so, there's a whole process, query process. It's called querying. If you go on social media, there's a hashtag called am querying. So everyone who's in this boat is talking about this. You basically need to research literary agencies and find someone who represents your kind of book. And then once you figure out who you want to query, you have to write a query letter. And what I found as one of the largest stumbling blocks for me was that I had written a 100,000 word novel and was unable to write a query letter. I was paralyzed with fear about writing this query letter. And your goal in this letter is to stand out. And there are, I think the last statistic I read was that 1 in 6,000 people, debut authors like me, brand new authors, secure representation, get an
One
agent.
in 6,000?
And because there's so much, and because with AI now, there's a lot of AI books coming out, or people using ChatGPT to help them write novels, their agent email inboxes are inundated with queries to publish books. And so your goal in this letter is to try to rise above and be noticed in the sea of letters. And so what actually I sent out about 25. I've read online that you're supposed to send out 100 before you start even feeling sad
Wow.
about all the rejections. I got a whole lot of rejections. I got some requests. They call them a full request. So I got a request. Usually in a query, you send out 10 pages. I got a few requests for the full manuscript. But what really helped me was, and this is kind of interesting because a lot of what we talk about is about connecting. And so I wanted to do it from the comfort of myself in my office behind a computer. That's how I wanted to find an agent. I didn't want to meet any other people along the way. And I ended up going to the San Francisco Writers Conference. That was in 2019, and paid for something called speed dating, which you go in a room and you have an hour and you meet with as many agents as you can in that hour and pitch your book. And it is absolutely terrifying. I was terrified. I was shaking. You don't even know if your book's any good. And here you are in this room full of writers with these agents trying to convince them that your book is good. But through that process, I met a woman. I sat at a speed date with a woman. I gave her my pitch. She held up her arm and said, "Oh, I have goosebumps."
Oh.
And then had me send my manuscript to her. And then through that course of time, she called me. She said, "This book isn't for me, but I'm going to pass it to my boss." And, many, many back and forth and many, many revisions later, my agent my wonderful, fabulous agent signed me.
Wow, this is incredible because in a previous podcast episode, I mentioned that a lot of times I tell people your network is your net worth. And in this case, you were trying to get a network digitally, the comfort of your home at the computer, but it took you to go physically network in order to build up the net worth, that connection with the boss of the agents to say, "Hey, I like this. Let's move forward." So that's incredible. Congratulations, Audrey. And I know going back to your childhood, right? You were dreaming about being a writer, and you said two things that are important. You said, I read to escape, and I wrote for therapy." And so I want to go back into those themes of escape and therapy, because after all, the theme of this podcast is, sueños, dreams to success. You had a dream, but it wasn't until 2024, at least for the novel, that it became the success, right? So that's a long time to be waiting. And in between, I know you've had a wonderful career of being a teacher, inspiring children to go and live lives of prosperity. And of course, you and I have gotten to work together with teachers and education leaders to train them on how to bring out the stories in young people, but also in teachers themselves, because we know the power of a story. And you tell a story, it's got power, but also you help someone find their story. Many times you and I find people, they do not want to share their story. And I understand you're one of those people who doesn't like sharing your story too much. You like telling other stories, but not your own. So I'm going to ask you a big favor, okay? And that big favor is, would you mind sharing a little bit of your story through one of the techniques that you helped me discover when we work with teachers and with young people, and that is through this poem, this kind of articulation of an activity that we do that you run everyone through. And so first I'll have you read it and then I'll have you break down how you facilitate this activity.
Okay. And as you said, I don't like sharing my own story. So here I go. This is called a Where I'm From poem. I am from 110 degree summers in the Central Valley, to hitchhiking down Beach Boulevard to get to Huntington Beach, to learning to drive in the Puente Hills Mall parking lot, from MTV and Friday night videos, The Breakfast Club, and the OG Top Gun. I'm from Hongbao under your pillow and Shifen with rosong for breakfast. I'm from sitting in the closet, talking on the kitchen phone from an extra long cord. I'm from not knowing the dishwasher wasn't only a drying rack. I'm from parents who didn't understand parent conferences, field trip chaperones, or school plays, but still grounded you for a B plus, AKA the Asian F.
Hmm.
I'm from mixtapes, renting videos at Blockbuster, and leaving my quarter on an arcade game. I'm from being teased about my lunches and getting yelled at in Chinese in front of my friends. I'm from being asked to teach the class to say gung hei fat choi every year, even though I don't speak Cantonese.
Hmm.
I'm from 203 total absences on my high school transcript.
Wow.
I'm from giving up on school within a system that was more than willing to give up on me. I am from college isn't in the cards for you, honey. I hold 2 degrees from UC Berkeley, go Bears, because I'm also from liking to prove people wrong.
Hmm. Wow. Just gonna let that sink in for a second there. Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful.
Thank you.
So you're Asian American.
I am.
You got that experience of you mentioned in the poem, right, being asked, hey, we uh share about gung hei fat choi, and you're what is that like people are like, hey, be an expert of your kind.
Yeah, so I grew up in Fresno before I moved to Southern California. So I went to school in Fresno until I was in 7th grade, and I was one of 2 Asian kids in the whole school. I think the whole school. The other one was my neighbor Carolyn, who was a year older. And so every year, and I had great elementary school teachers. I had a wonderful elementary school experience. I loved school. I loved coming to school. And I don't think it was until later that I realized how every year I was in the spotlight at only one time of year, and that was when Chinese New Year came around, which we now call Lunar New Year. And so that was the year that, the teachers who weren't Asian did not know how Chinese New Year was celebrated in our family, in my particular family, because how everybody celebrates things different. If you talk to families about how they celebrate Christmas, it's different no matter who you talk to. But there was a feeling that, and there was no Google at the time, but some books said on Chinese New Year, Chinese people do these things. And so we would do these activities like coloring lanterns, and the teachers would ask me to talk about it, and we didn't do that at my house. And so all I knew was I got hongbao under my pillow, and in the morning I had cash. And
what hongbao is that?
It's the red envelope.
Envelope. Oh yeah.
And so that was first and foremost in my mind was Chinese New Year meant a red envelope of cash. And we didn't do a lot of the traditions that quote unquote traditional Chinese people do for Chinese New Year. Everyone's family is different. Everyone has their own story. And so to be a representative of an entire culture, and especially something so personal as a family tradition to celebrate a holiday.
Yeah.
It's asking a lot of young people of any group.
And that's probably why it's so important to get the story out of a child before asking them to tell this story. It sounds counterintuitive, but you want to get someone's story before asking them to give a story. In other words, be an expert at your people. Actually, before I ask you that, hey, how do you celebrate? How do you celebrate? Oh, I got your story. Will you tell me about the red envelope? Will you school us a little bit? What is the difference between saying Chinese New Year and Lunar New Year?
Well, because so I grew up obviously calling it Chinese New Year, and I think the general population did as well. But it really is, it's the reason that the New Year changes every year is because it's based on the moon. That's the calendar it's based on, and not the calendar we're used to here in the United States. And so many other Asian cultures celebrate the Lunar New Year. And so to call it Chinese New Year when many other cultures across Asia also celebrate this same, follow the same calendar and do the same celebrations, it's a little reductive to call it Chinese New Year. And I'm still working on breaking the habit because that's what I grew up
Okay.
calling it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's go back to the theme of escape, right? You read to escape is what you said earlier, and you wrote for therapy. So let's start with escape. What were you escaping as a child in those moments that you were like reading to escape?
I think as a child, I mean, I had a very, quote unquote, normal, happy childhood. But I I think on the one hand, it was escaping into something exciting, to be able to go to Narnia, to be able to go through the magic toll booth and find a new world. But also it's, as a child there, you're always looking around, or I was that kid that was always looking around and wondering if I was the same as everyone else. There's a
Mm,
point when you're young where I think in our elementary years where you want to be like everyone else. You want to make sure you don't stick out and that your life is the same as others, and you're fitting in and your friends like you, and which continues certainly through middle school and high school. And then, at some point in high school, you get to a point where you don't want to be like everyone else. And so you start trying on different personalities. But I think in terms of books being an escape, I often read books to find out what other families were like.
hmm
And because, I'm first generation, so my parents emigrated here from Taiwan. And I knew we didn't have the same kind of families as all the kids I was going to school with.
mm,
And so I read to find out what normal meant at the time.
That's powerful. You read to find out what normal meant. So you were reading to understand your environment and to kind of cope and sort of navigate that environment. That's pretty powerful. That's just a little one, like figuring out like I'm gonna study my environment not just by looking, but by reading. Yeah, that's such a powerful phenomenon. I'm thinking about this idea of representation still, and being a model minority, Asian Americans, many of the groups under that umbrella end up becoming a model minority. So it's like, oh, you're supposed to be the smart one. You're supposed to get the A. You're supposed to be good at math. And you mention it in your poem. You say that the B plus is the Asian F. So tell me, what do you mean by that? And like, how was that imposed on you both either at home and in school growing up?
So I was thinking a lot about this today. And so in growing up, it was just, you're going to college. It wasn't, will I go to college? It wasn't, maybe I'll do something else after college. You're going to college. And beyond that, it's, you're going to Harvard and you're going to become a doctor.
Mhm.
There's a few accepted in, to be make a huge generalization. There's a few accepted professions in Chinese families, and that's doctor or lawyer. So I knew since I was born I was going to college.
Mhm.
And so the joke about the Asian F is that you come home in your Chinese American family and you got a 99, and your family asks you what happened to that other percent.
Mm.
So to say education was a priority or a focus in our family is a bit of an understatement. But as I said in my poem, I graduated high school with a 1.8 GPA with 200 plus absences
Whoa.
on my high school
How did
transcript.
that happen?
As I said, elementary school, I loved elementary school. And then my father passed away when I was in 7th grade. And that's when we moved to LA, and which, also coincided with becoming a teen or a tween. So a lot is going on in my brain at the same time this horrible tragedy happened. And we moved to LA, and I didn't know anyone. And by the time I got to high school, I had figured out the game of high school, and I didn't like it. So I gave up. I didn't like having to go to school every day. And quite frequently when I was at home, I was home when I was missing school. I was at home studying oftentimes, and I would miss school Monday through Thursday and then show up on Friday and get an A on the test.
Whoa.
But I still failed my classes because I didn't have participation points, and I wasn't showing up to class, and I didn't do the homework. And I think in my teenage self-righteous brain, I felt like, why should I? Why should I have to do that when I can show up and do the test that you wanted me to do? So I gave up. But because I had this instilled in me my whole life that I'm going to college, and I certainly wasn't going to Harvard by that point, but I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I would. And so I went to my high school counselor at around the time people were applying for college, and I asked, okay, what do I do to go? And that's when she pulled up my records, looked at my grades, looked at my absences, and said, oh, college isn't for you, honey.
Whoa. Whoa. So this was your way in many ways. You were escaping also school, you were escaping the reality of your father passing away. Um this is was your way of coping with your dad being gone? And what happened to him? You know?
He had an aneurysm and passed away very, very suddenly over basically Christmas,
Wow.
on Christmas when I was in 7th grade.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
And it was all just very sudden and abrupt. And I think the other part of then leaving, as you talk about your net worth and your network, I had a network in Fresno where I had been almost my whole life. So I had friends, and I had friends' families who I'd grown up with, friends' parents. Your whole ecosystem was taking care of me. And so I think it was obviously coping with that was very, very difficult. And and who can say, but I think it was exacerbated by the fact that then my network was gone when we moved.
Why did your mom decide to move?
I don't know. I don't believe she could stay. She couldn't stay in the house anymore.
Yeah, of course, the big loss was ever present.
Yeah. And my sister is 7 years older than I am and was already up north. So it was just the two of us. My sister was going to Berkeley, and my mom and I moved down to LA.
Okay. Okay, so that was the escape theme. And now I wanted to talk, you brought up that writing was your therapy. So even though you were, this delinquent, truant, high schooler, were you home writing?
Oftentimes, yeah. Yeah, on a typewriter, because I
What the heck were you writing
born
about?
in the 70s. I wrote short stories.
What were they about?
Sometimes they were parodies of. I have a very snarky sense of humor, And I sometimes they were parodies of people in my high school.
Ah. Did they ever find out?
No,
Okay.
they're gone too. You can't find them. They're not, we didn't
Okay.
have online to come back and haunt you.
You weren't
So
posting them on social
nope.
media? Okay.
Thank God. Yeah, I wrote short stories. I
What was one
wrote,
example of one of the parodies?
I wrote a, I don't remember what was specifically in it, but I remember there was like a clique of, as there always are in high schools, a clique of people that I, you know, thought were ridiculous. And so I wrote a fast forward 15 years later, what are they doing story that was not very nice nor very flattering of these folks who I'm sure are wonderful people today.
Wow. Wow. Well, speaking, of sort of, mean groups of mean kids, right? And the bullying. One of the research findings out there is that actually, emotional intelligence increases when you sort of engage in storytelling. So, give me your perspective. Like, how do you think personal stories enhance a child's emotional intelligence?
So I'm thinking about something you often say when you work with youth. That's something that we do when we work together about, and that you mentioned about flipping the script.
Hmm.
So, for instance, when teenagers especially, but students, I was a semi introverted child all the way through. I got worse as a teenager, but I think we spend a lot of time, first of all, telling ourselves certain things about our stories and framing them in whatever mindset we're in, feeling dejected about them, worrying that our stories are that we're the only ones going through X thing and that nobody else around us could understand. And so one of the things we do with the youth we work with, or when we work with teachers and share activities with them, is to have students be able to have that safe space to, first of all, to feel safe enough to be vulnerable to share their stories.
Hmm.
But then beyond that, to make connections with others through their stories and realize that we have a lot more in common than we have differences,
Yeah.
that we all experience struggle, we all feel sad, we all wonder if our parents are the same as other parents, or if we all feel judged, and or to be able to have students feel safe enough to share that with each other, to make connections, makes you less lonely.
Hmm.
And then what we do with our teachers with this flipping the script is to help teachers guide students to see their stories as a place of power and not a place of dejection or rejection. To say,
Hmm.
you experience, wow, all this trauma you went through, all of these experiences you've had have made you a stronger person. Look at all of these skills you have now because you persevered, you lived through this horrible thing.
Yeah.
And for a young person who's never been told that, to be able to know that, you got some skills out of this that some people don't have because of the experience you had. It's really, really powerful. We've seen it
Yeah.
many, many times change many, many students' lives.
Absolutely. And this notion that our stories are not just for entertainment, what that means is that some of the children going into a school system, but also our colleagues in a workplace, they're coming from places, cultures where that's how you pass on knowledge and instructions is through a story. And but we live in a society where we want to be efficient. So no room for talking right now, talking story right now. We're just going to give you instructions, right? These are the 3 bullet points you need to follow. Go do your job. Or these are the three uh, themes you need to follow. Go write this paper. But in that process, really unraveling a story with information on how to complete the task um, becomes a little bit more conducive for someone that comes from a population that's a storytelling people. And sometimes we forget that. I mean, even in the literature, I'm citing here research in Social Science and Technology Journal, there was a study that investigated the effects of storytelling on motivation. So, stories motivate us on critical thinking and learning engagement. And the findings revealed that students involved in digital storytelling activities, some work that we do with educators, experience a 25% increase in motivation and a 30% enhancement in critical thinking skills. Furthermore, there was a notable improvement in overall learning engagement among participants. I'm gonna tell you something, Audrey. I like storytelling, but I don't like to write. And I've written, 9 books, but I do not like to write. And I think, you know, um, for some of us, we don't like to write. We like to tell stories. We have to make ourselves write because that's how you get the story across as well. I wanna ask you another question, and this has to um, uh, build thinking of self esteem. So, like you went through this experience, right? You might have felt kind of low. I don't know if self esteem was involved. Like I'm coming from this different world. I'm not feeling good around this conventional environment, and I'm in LA, and there's no network for me here. But how does storytelling help individuals kind of gain a little confidence in the environment they're in?
I think it does come back to connection with other people. And you and I have talked a lot about the wolf pack idea and wanting to do things on our own. And I'm guilty of always wanting to be really efficient and get things done and follow the timeline. But I think stories help us create connection with the world, but from the recipient of the storyteller. So I'm also thinking about stories help us connect with other people. And when we hear other people's stories, we see the world a little differently. We have more empathy, and we we can't have too much empathy. This world needs more empathy, and we
Mhm.
can't have too much. And I think all of these things get thrown around on social media, and all of these judgments, and I'm guilty of the same, and the self-righteousness and all of those things that we put people into these groups because humans naturally have to categorize things, and then human nature is to not only categorize but see where you fall after you've categorized into good, bad, or otherwise, and then I'm more on the good side or more on the bad side. When we hear other stories, it's impossible not to have a little empathy for where someone came from
Mhm.
and why someone thinks the way they do.
Mhm.
And if we all made a little bit more effort to understand where someone's coming from before sticking them in that category, as just humanity wise, we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also the act of telling a story, especially when you go through that, like, wait, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. But wait, there's one level more in my evolution and my growth, and that's to be a thriver. So because someone victimized me or did something to me, I now have committed myself to making sure no one's ever victimized in that way. And that's going to be my career path, or that's going to be my volunteer path, or that's going to be my day to day journey. Now there's a fierceness in the person to prosper and propel themselves. And that's the thriving mindset. Uh, what I want to do now is just take a little break, a little pause, and let all of this kind of conversation sink in for a minute. Just want to take a moment also to introduce you to my book, Street Life: Poverty, Gangs, and a PhD. And so this book has a lot of those moments of reflection, tells my story and many other chapters of my story. But more importantly, it has some prescriptives. Like, what is it that we need to do when we're going through these moments? of Adversity. You can find it on Amazon.com. Street Life by Dr. Victor Rios. Welcome back. I'm talking here with professional storyteller Audrey Lee, novelist. She's helped me actually develop tools for teachers to use with students in bringing out their own stories. So we've collaborated in about 25 different school districts to bring this work out. And so it's wonderful to have her here with me today. And I just wanted to cite a study and then start to kind of delve into her novel. And there's another study by the National Center for Biotechnology Information that revealed that incorporating storytelling into lessons improved learning outcomes by 30% because it enhanced focus, comprehension, and the ability to apply knowledge in real world context. So, folks, sometimes we think storytelling is left to maybe the English class or left to parents to read stories to their kids. But even in science, storytelling is so important. And that study proves it. So, very important that we continue um, influencing others in telling their stories because storytelling is a healing process. But also, storytelling can be very fun. And before we wrap up here, I know that Audrey, as I mentioned, has written this wonderful book, Mechanics of Memory. And I want to tell you a little bit about the book, and I want Audrey to talk a little bit about the book. So, The Mechanics of Memory is a near future thriller that delves into the malleable nature of memory. So, where's our memory? What is memory about it? And memory, in many ways, becomes a character, a subject. The narrative follows Hope Nakano, who, after undergoing months of memory reconsolidation treatments at the Copeland Stark facility, remains unable to recall the events of her lost year or the life she was building with her partner, Luke. As fragmented memories resurface, Hope's trust in her recollections wanes, leading her to question the intention of Copeland Stark. Her pursuit of the truth uncovers deeper secrets that the organization is desperate to conceal. The novel masterfully intertwines elements of psychological suspense and speculative fiction, exploring the themes of love, loyalty, and the reliability of one's own mind. Hey, listen, many times I forget a lot of things, and I'm like, am I really Victor Rios or am I in another dimension now? So, Audrey, I mean, you wrote this. I know you wrote it for fun. You've told us a little bit of your story, the escapism, and I could see you writing a sci-fi novel just based on your story, right? And Toni Morrison wrote a novel, and it was about Beloved, about the journey of really the journey of slavery. And along the way, she was interviewed, and she said, I could tell more of the truth and what happens in the real world through fiction than I can tell if I write a history book for you. And sometimes, we write for fun, but really there's some truth that's coming out and some connection to an audience that is seeking truth, but they're doing it in a different way. They're doing it through fiction in the same way you were escaping as a little kid, and in the same way you were writing for therapy as a teenager. So tell us a little bit about how this sci-fi book, right, that's out there, psychological, sci-fi. Um, how does it bring connection to the real world or even your audiences now? How have they connected to their real world?
I think it's interesting you brought up the Toni Morrison quote because what I've noticed a lot in my reading lately, and I read a ton of thrillers because I write thrillers, is that there's a definite wave of books coming out with a lot of social commentary. a lot of social commentary. And I was talking with a good author friend of mine, Jackie Johnson, who we were talking about social commentary that's a little too on the nose in a, when you're trying to escape. And she had a great insight on it, which is that's not storytelling, that's propaganda. And what we try to do as writers, as storytellers, is to make people think. So when I say on the nose, I just mean there's a lot of social commentary in my novel, but it's not right out there. You have to kind of dig and find it, and then you're asked to think about the themes in it. At least that's what you hope. And what I did in this, I really enjoy shows like Severance and Black Mirror, and which is technically they're speculative. So they take something that is in our lives today, a technology usually, but not always, and fast forward it 5 years, 10 years, what could happen to it. And so part of what's in this novel is technology that completely exists. It blew my mind when I was doing research that I would Google things and say, oh, does this technology exist? Oh my gosh, it's been going on since 2019. And so I'm asking readers to think about technology, about the world, about social issues, and what could it look like if it was turned on its ear just a little bit. And then with this nature of memory, what I really wanted to explore in this with memory, I find memory fascinating. I read many, many books about brain science and where memories are formed and why we have them. But what I discovered was that memory is completely unreliable. So we tell ourselves stories, and the more we tell it to ourselves, the more we believe it, whether or not it happens. So there's gaps there. We're not computers, so we can't possibly remember everything accurately. And when we don't, our brain fills in the gaps. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And so I wanted to explore what would happen between a relationship between two people if one of them didn't have their memories anymore. What makes us, memory is kind of our identity. It's what makes us who we are. And so if we don't have them, who do we become?
That's powerful because in many ways it's the other side of the spectrum of that victim, survivor, thriver approach, because I'm trying to get young people to tell themselves a story, a real story. It's real. They went through it in 3 different versions. Victim, this person did something to me. The world did this to me. The world imposed poverty on me, displacement, homelessness, a drug addicted parent. I'm a victim. And then flip it to I'm a survivor. My parents were caught up. I'm growing up poor. Like I've been homeless, raising my siblings, and that's giving me the strength to move forward in life. And then version 3, right? This is telling yourself that story and telling others that story. Same thing. My parents are caught up. I'm out here on the streets, and regardless, I'm gonna continue pushing forward. And when you have a strong memory to remember, if we think of even the root, right? To remember, uh, as in dismembered, right? Cut into pieces. Now we remember, we put ourselves back together. And so to remember, as you say, that is our identity. This story is of ourselves, is our identity. And you're kind of flipping it and saying, look, what happens when you dismember it in the memory. So that's really, really powerful. So Audrey, I know we've been talking about you being Asian American, growing up with that identity, you sort of finding ways to cope from some of the losses you had, and building this long dream, right, that you had as a little girl to write a novel. And here you are, you have an agent, you wrote a novel. I understand you have completed a second novel now. So this is incredible. But I also know that, a lot of the work that writers do and researchers do, in some ways, even though we might disguise it a bit, it's autobiographical. And I know that you had intention here because the character in the novel is a strong Asian American woman. Can you tell me a little bit about the intention there?
So I mentioned before how much I love books, how I devoured them as a kid. But everything I read as a kid, there were very few stories with kids that looked like me or who had families like mine.
Mm.
And while that has changed a lot in the last 30 years, we have so much more of diversity in young adult publishing. There are many, many books coming out every day featuring all different kinds of kids from all walks of life. The reality is in the adult world of publishing and in the young adult world, there isn't a lot of diversity. There still aren't enough writers of color being represented, being published, being put on bookshelves, showing up on a shelf at Barnes and Noble. So one of the things I really wanted to do was to create an Asian
Mm.
character, a strong female character, and have it be not a novel about the history of the Asian American culture, Chinese American culture. My main character is actually half Japanese, half Chinese, which
Mm.
my son is half Japanese, half
Oh,
Chinese.
yeah.
But I really wanted to create a story that is a sci-fi story. It's not historical fiction. There's nothing, there's not a whole lot of mention of specific mention of culture. But I think it's important to have characters, protagonists that do all the things that we're used to in mainstream media and not just stick them in a place where they need, like Shogun, which I loved Shogun, but that's my
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
example.
Yeah, absolutely. Movie script, movie deal.
Oh,
That's
yeah. I mean, if Apple TV's listening, I'm ready.
all right. Well, hopefully Apple TV is listening, and they can contact your agent, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So we're gonna start to close up. I want to appreciate you, Audrey. It's been wonderful having you. As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with this thought. Storytelling is not just an act of sharing, it's an act of empowerment. Whether you see it in Audrey's story or in her novel or in the stories we bring out with the young people that we work with. It's the bridge between pain and purpose, between feeling isolated and feeling limitless. We've seen how stories have transformed lives, how struggles can be turned into stepping stones for individuals and entire communities. These stories remind us that adversity does not define us. The way we tell our stories does. Storytelling isn't just about looking back, it's about moving forward. It's about reclaiming your narrative and reshaping it into something powerful. I am thriving because of all that's happened to me. Something very healing. When we share our truth, we don't just heal ourselves, we light the way for others to follow. So I ask you, audience, what's your story? How can you use it to inspire, to heal, and to create change? Because the question isn't whether your story will make an impact, it's how soon. Close your eyes one more time for me. And this time, picture the word storytelling again. Imagine the power it holds to ignite collective healing, to transform lives, and to change the world. Thank you for joining us today. Let's go out and start telling stories that matter. Until next time, I'm Dr. Victor Rios. Keep sharing your truth and becoming the North Star for others to follow.